or hits some other defined condition, it takes automated action to remove that instance from the cloud. And we have another controller, machine set controller, that'll give us another instance. From time to time, an administrator might want to do maintenance on a node for one reason or another. One example is for our bare metal users, they might want to power off the machine to replace like a stick of RAM or something like that. And so we don't want to trigger all these automated processes to delete the instances or reprovision things or move storage. Another use case is we do in-place updates on OpenShift. So we have what we call a machine config operator. So when we update the configuration of a node, those updates get pushed out and the node reboots. That can take a couple minutes. And same thing, we don't want any automated process to go back behind us while we're doing this update and say, hey, this node is broken, I need to get rid of it. Then some other use cases are, let's say I'm an administrator and I'm investigating some problem with the node. Maybe it's some kind of security event, or maybe it's just I need to look at some logs. And I don't really want anything else to reboot the node or delete the node or pretty much do anything to it. You know, I just want it to leave it as is. So those are a couple use cases. What we're trying to do is have an ability for these different things to coordinate actions to nodes in a way that they don't have to know about each other. So you have different existing components like node problem detector, and they have different remediators. We have machine health checkers. And, you know, out in the wild, people are picking and choosing all these different components. Someone left a good comment. Weaveworks is working on something similar for deleting instances and stuff behind the scenes. So I presented it to both SIG node, that was quite some time ago now, and the SIG cluster lifecycle, and the feedback's been generally positive. Now the questions are, who should own it? And then some of the finer implementation details, namespaces, and semantics about how everything should behave. So I think that covers the high level.
Can I ask a couple clarifying questions for those who might not have as much insight? So for readers of the KEP, is it basically advocating for a new sub-project within Kubernetes to be sponsored by a SIG to be determined that would implement the core controller? Is the desire to integrate this with the node lifecycle controller itself within Kubernetes or one of the other cloud provider projects? That think that maybe I guess where will the code live that did
Sure.
you have?
That was kind of like some of the, I answered some of those questions just with like some answers that seem like good choices to me, I think would be acceptable. As far as like creating a new work group or SIG, no, I think this could live in either cluster lifecycle or node. I don't think it's really a major component that needs a whole lot of life cycling. I think this is one of those things that like it's a voluntary thing that things are coordinating on, but it's not fundamentally altering the behavior of any existing thing. It would be like opt-in behavior, but the cross-section of the code I think is very small. So where does the code live? Well, the bulk of the code kind of lives in the controllers that are implementing the acquire lease mechanism, but the actual changes to like core, yes, I think the node lifecycle controller makes some sense as far as creating the lease object that everyone's going to consume. And then I want to say it's the API. I left a link to the code where I believe we're creating some default namespaces today. So I'm proposing that we just create this new default namespace in the same manner. So to catch everyone up, I'm proposing we create a new default namespace called like kube node maintenance. And in that namespace, we create a lease object. There's one lease object per node, similar to what we do with the I can never remember what the existing lease is called, but it's basically like the liveness check or whatever for the nodes. And that's pretty much the changes I want to make to core. And then the bulk of the usefulness is really how consumers are utilizing that lease object.
Okay, so I guess maybe the question for an architecture SIG is to ask, like as a project, we're not prescriptive on the particular approach to lifecycle, right? So within the SIG, we talk about things like conformance and code organization and that type of thing. And so I think one way we could be looking at this KEP is saying, is the function that's described an optional choice that a lifecycling a user who uses a particular lifecycling approach would want to make? And if so, like, then the way I'm thinking about this now, and I know you presented a SIG node bits a while ago, is like, it's not much different than like when some folks at SUSE, I think, were presenting like a seccomp operator, right? Like, if there are users within the project who would find it value and we'd want a space to explore it, like, I personally don't have an issue if either SIG node or cluster lifecycle wanted to sponsor the sub project. But if the question is, do we want this to be inherent to every Kubernetes distribution and a part of like core conformance? Like, I don't, maybe that's where this SIG could come in and talk through, but I don't think the idea has probably been proven out enough to demonstrate that yet. And so I'll pause here and see if others have perspectives on it, but that's my initial thought is like, if the tension is across the two intersecting SIGs, which one feels capable of sponsoring it? Both seem to have overlap, and so we could flip a coin. But do others on the call feel like they have anything they would want to add?
I would say that I second what you're saying, Derek. I mean, I feel like SIG architecture in this regard is just kind of guarding against unintentional secondary consequences from changes to core. My personal reservation is I have relatively strong feelings about introducing new required namespaces. And I think that there's a non-trivial amount of disruption that can be done from that. And yeah, I'd be interested to hear what other people have to say.
Sorry, Go ahead.
From the sequence lifecycle perspective, we discussed that this is covering definitely a gap that we see for some use cases. But if the code is going to live in core, we are hesitant to own the feature because we are not going to own the code. If it's an external controller, like in the case of the SIGCOM operator, we are okay to own this. Basically, this was the general discussion we had at the meeting.
My question is this all or nothing, everything has to be in KK, or is there a bit that can be in KK and the rest can be outside? That would be my question. I'm sorry, I haven't read the KEP yet.
My thinking is this should be standard for any Kubernetes deployment in the future. The whole point of this KEP is to have something that everyone can rely on to coordinate. I just feel like that's like a really big missing feature right now. Obviously, I could build something that looks like this and behaves like this and modify different components to use whatever that thing is. So making it optional and making it owned by a separate controller that's not always deployed kind of removes some of the value, because now I have to make sure that I've deployed that thing and then that these other components are integrating with that thing. And so now we're just creating like a chain of dependencies. And I don't think that the functionality that we need to introduce as far as managing the life cycle of this thing is complex enough to need its own separate component. Like there's no CRDs, there's really nothing to reconcile. There's nothing to really life cycle. All of the business logic is incumbent upon the people acquiring and releasing, the controllers acquiring and releasing this lease object. And so that's why I think this is appropriate to go into core.
I feel like there's maybe some prior art here in terms of like some of the discussions that were done around virtual nodes and stuff, because I feel like my personal feeling is this gets a bit far into lifecycle management in ways that I think are making some assumptions that maybe don't necessarily align with all the use cases out there. I mean, I see the need for something like this because the coordination aspects are tricky, but something out of tree, I feel like just from an implementation standpoint makes a lot more sense. I just feel like this seems relatively straightforward on the outside, but I think that once you start digging into some of the use cases, that it could become much more thorny. And it's definitely not something I think that everybody wants necessarily. I think it's something that there's probably a subset of folks that want.
This is definitely something that would be opt-in, so nobody has to use this component or care about it, but it is just a place for everyone to standardize.
Yeah, so I think with that distinction you've raised, Michael, I think it's an important one. And so I guess what I'm observing as the core tension is which subgroup within the project could provide a space for this exploration to occur where the behavior is opt-in. So I don't see this going in right into like the core node lifecycle controller that says, SIG node says, yes, we're gonna say every cluster has this right now. But I could see SIG node sponsoring this, or SIG cluster lifecycle. And so if the discussion out of this architecture SIG is like, we see that there's value in providing a forum for those who have this problem to collaborate on a common solution within the Kubernetes project space, then and right now it feels like that's probably true, then maybe just between the two identified SIGs, we can just reach a closure on who wants to provide the space for that collaboration to occur. And so that's probably where I am right now. So like between Don and myself on SIG node, and then Tim and the rest of the gang on SIG cluster lifecycle, like we could just have a quick discussion on saying, does the SIG want to provide a forum for a small sub project to explore this? And then if there are a large enough set of actors that want to consume it and build around it, then the value will become clear. But I think it's probably difficult to say within this group that it should be there by default everywhere. And that's probably the best I could say right now within SIG Arch. Maybe Dims, do you want to I assume you probably.
Walter has his hand up, so I'll let him go first.
Thanks, Dems. I just have a couple of minor points, but I think they may be worth going. I'd like to reiterate Jace's point about the namespace. We already have a lot of problems with webhooks causing problems on leases when they're in the cube system namespace. And I think putting them anywhere other than the cube system namespace is actually going to make this system less functional. So I would just +1, and if anyone wants to know why, I can give a lot more details. I would also say on the trying to make this thing useful, we've got a lot of controllers that this is going to need to touch, and I think it isn't useful unless it touches many of them. Just as an example, we talk about the node lifecycle controller, but there are 2 of those at least that I know of. So presumably if you wanted to put it in there, you'd want to put it in both places because you have choice of which one of the 2 you're going to run. And we've also, I mean, there are a lot of weird things about the lease object itself and leader elections. So I think maybe it would be worth also at least touching base with API machinery because, and maybe cloud provider, because we have a lot of experience with some of the side pieces here. And we're not going to say no, but I think we can certainly help avoid a lot of landmines.
So my 2 cents is if you want a repository to start trying this out and collaborating, for sure, we can start there. Would you need an answer right now asking that this be included, in KK itself? That would be the question I would ask. Does it need to be in KK right now, or can some experimentation happen and then we can revisit this?
Well, certainly we can do any kind of experimentation. I don't even think we need any software to do experimentation. I mean, we're talking about creating a lease object and nothing reconciles it. So I could create a namespace and I could create a lease object in like 10 seconds. Really, the bulk of the value is integrating other components. So I guess what I'd like to see is if we're going to iron out any details like the namespace thing, what I don't want to do is have this thing persist somewhere else with a plan where if we're in SIG node and we're assuming this namespace is going to exist and everything and it's there for some time, and then later we say, oh, we can't do that namespace, we're not creating a new namespace, or the naming doesn't make sense or anything like that, then we have to migrate potentially things later down the road. It just seems like we could probably answer that question up front.
I'm sorry, I didn't see if anyone had their hands up, but I guess I had another question, Michael, which was like, today, the kubelet does maintain a lease, and we did go through the work of obviously getting a new namespace for that. Have you thought about, is there any opportunity to piggyback on top of the existing lease that kubelet's renewed to do something there? Like, is there anything we do around an annotation or something to explore the thought without needing a secondary namespace or lease itself?
Well, I haven't explored reusing that existing lease because that lease is like got a very defined and finite purpose that I think I don't think that would be really great. Reusing the same namespace is a problem from the user experience point of view. If I'm an administrator and I want to control this lease myself, then I need something other than the node name as the lease's name for this lease, because there can only be one thing of one kind in a namespace. So, or, with the same name. So, yeah.
Maybe the other thing would be helpful is you identified a set of potential consumers. I don't know if it was captured in the KEP, but for those that might want to review this in greater detail afterwards, is there a list of like known potential consumers that would be interested in this that we can enrich the KEP with to know that there's people who would want to leverage it or projects?
Well, I think anything that is in charge of creating nodes, getting rid of nodes, rebooting nodes, draining nodes. There's all sorts of different components out there in the community that do these type of operations. One thing that's come up a couple times is there's another KEP, the node shutdown KEP. This is a potential integration point for that as well. Uh, some references have been made. Maybe these two things have like some overlapping functionality, but I really look at them as complementary. So for the node shutdown KEP, it looks to see like this node is shut down. Is the cloud provider, is it still there? And then can I take corrective actions based on that information? And some of those corrective actions might be applying taints or doing other things. Whereas this, that component that's being proposed could look at this lease and say, hey, somebody's doing maintenance to this. This is probably an expected situation. I don't need to apply these taints. So there's, I think the challenge is getting lots of people to focus on one implementation. I think once we have something that we can standardize on, the use cases will follow.
Maybe one final question. Is there, I need to think in my head a little bit, I'm sorry. If this was captured as the idea here is you needed a single owner who says I'm doing maintenance. And so the reason that you couldn't say propagate a new condition into the node object itself is that you don't know who the maintenance holder is and you think more than one actor is going to try to do maintenance at a time?
I'm not sure what you mean by propagate to the node object itself.
Saying add a new node.status.condition.
Well, who's setting the status? If it's all these different components that need to be updating the node object directly, I mean, that's certainly feasible from a technical standpoint. But it's my understanding that there's a little bit of a bigger hurdle to uh, allowing all these things to read and write from the node object. We have RBAC considerations and things like that. Is that a path that we want to pursue? I'm perfectly happy to pursue that path. I mean, to me, it makes sense that if you're going to be doing disruptive things to the node, then do this on the node itself. One drawback to putting in the status object is if an administrator just wants to say, hey, I need nobody to touch this right now, there's not really a great, easy way to do that in the status field.
So I think it's, first I want to thank you, Michael, for bringing that topic to the SIG. It probably was presented to a new audience that hadn't reflected on this. I'm not sure we'll get a resolution today, but I think people were presented with a new problem maybe that they hadn't reflected on before, and maybe some ideas will come out of it, or others who had similar challenges. Trying to think to find a way to maybe move forward on this. I don't have a great thought just yet, but I feel like at least allowing some time for people to reflect or read the CAP in use cases more in depth is probably the best outcome we'll get today in the call. Is that fair?
I definitely think that's fair. That's a lot of what I'm searching for here is I think we've identified this as a need. What I want is everyone to put their brains together and come up. I don't really care what the implementation looks like. I just know I maintain components that need something that looks like this, and I'd rather everyone standardize, so I don't have to do it twice.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what you're saying. It's just that if we find a specific problem like the node shutdown cap, which can use this thing that you're proposing here, like an IR library that you mentioned here, and get some specific consumer lined up, then I think we'll be able to make more progress here, I think.
Well, I mean, I definitely have specific consumers, internally that want this exact functionality. So if we're talking about the machine config operator and machine health checks, those are two things we're doing today. So and then also like bare metal operator, they want to build this maintenance scheduling thing, kind of similar thing, integrated with machine health checks. So I
Yeah,
think
so
there's
let's find some problem which is not just Red Hat in the community, and the node shutdown cap seems like a good one.
Yeah, the bare metal stuff I'm referring to, that's upstream. That's a cluster API. Machine health checks cluster API. So the machine config operator is the only thing that's Red Hat specific. And,
okay.
That would apply to anybody that's doing in-place updates, whereas the cluster API does a roll and replace.
I really like that idea of trying to have some kind of coordination with the cluster API folks. So if you can propose something that will be helping them, that's definitely a good way to get this in as a standardized thing, because as a community, we are standardizing on cluster API, and if cluster API needs something from us in KK, then that's like a good reason to get this started.
I'm a member of that project.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so I think, Michael, thanks for trying to find the consumer. And I think it's fair to say there are a wide variety of cluster lifecycling solutions that are successful, and having a standard that folks could use to signal when maintenance might be occurring is probably valuable. And so thanks for presenting, and we can allow folks on the call to reflect to see if they have use cases that come to mind as they're celebrating the 4th of July or having a great weekend wherever else they live. So for the next topic, do we want to talk through the operating system and hardware architecture support topic that we deferred in the week prior? And is there someone who wants to represent the challenges that the project has happened to help frame this?
I don't think the Lumos support people are on the code today, but we have the ARM people.
Yeah, maybe it would be better to defer this to next week, since we definitely have like 19 minutes, and we have the folks from New Zealand who who are awake early in the morning to talk to us.
It's pretty early. Rian's from South Africa, so we're spread all over. He's also up. I'll take that as a go ahead and start on the sub-project update for conformance. If I could share my screen, that would be great. I will see if Tim can hand that back.
Yeah, I enabled share. Please try.
All right, thank you. Try again. Awesome. I have a few links here, and normally I go through our slide deck, but I want to maybe not do that today. Just focus on some really high-level things for the amount of time that we have. I'm really happy with the progress we've made. This is the existing site, and you can see over the past few releases, we've gone from less than near 22% or something, all the way up to over 40, which is really great. And this is our stable GA endpoints that are lacking conformance test. We also have this extra gray line here that we added that were for endpoints that we're not going to be testing for conformance because they're not eligible yet. There's some conversations around adding profiles, and they are solidifying much closer. I know that Aaron is bringing forth some things probably in the coming week or so that will help address some of that. We also have a new website that we're probably going to replace today, depending on the output of this call. We've just moved the main page to be this primary graph with the ability to check here. Stable endpoints, and also just to switch releases going back here rather than having that graph on the front page. And I think the most interesting thing is we are part of our goals for this 1.19 release was to help gate KK so that we don't get new endpoints that aren't tested. And we have a JSON file that we generate based on endpoints and whether or not they're covered or not. And we have done that all the way back to 1.19 to kind of show a graph like this where the dark green at the bottom is always going to be our fully conformant and tested endpoints. And as that graph is higher than the one on the left, that's tested endpoints that are to technical debt getting paid off. The new tested means that there were endpoints introduced in that release that came with their conformance test. This is really the only growth we want to see long term. The growth we need to see to get rid of the red is the growth in the green, the dark green at the bottom. And the red is our technical debt. The stuff we want to completely eliminate, it may be a little hard to read, and I apologize for that, is the new untested. And you can see in our earlier releases, we had new endpoints added that don't have tests. And I think we even have one currently inside of this release. And this is the stuff we want to kind of create a gate for to ensure we don't get these new endpoints coming in. And I think that became a policy sometime in about 1.14, 1.15. So we're doing a pretty good job of it. If I go down a bit, this is our almost technical debt per release chart. And you can more easily tell when we have endpoints that are getting into GA that do not have conformance tests. Our current set of projects beyond writing tests to promote for conformance is putting up a conformance, CNCF Kids conformance gate, which we're nearly done with. I'd say we'll probably finish this next week. where we needed to set up a PROW CNCF.io instance that was not the KK, the Kate's infra working group, but maybe something like a CNCF infra working group that we're still talking about. We also have our KK conformance gate. That is what we will be switching to next. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with us continuing forward with that work. That's the main things without going straight through the news. If you want to look at our KK or the CNCF conformance ProwBot work, it's over here in the CNCF infra org, and we have a few test PRs firing on that. Here's a list of new endpoints. These are the ones that have been added by the community, and big shouts out to Liggett for making sure that all of the endpoints that his groups have been a part of are coming with their tests. And they all link back to API Snoop to show that coverage. Super happy in this increase in coverage, up to 41.2. There's been a big conversation around watch tooling that I think has impacted our velocity thus far. And some of that is us needing to get quicker feedback from possibly different SIGs, rather than relying on the very few people who show up and do PR reviews for the test writing team here at II. So we may modify our process to include before we approve work, ensuring that we have sponsorship nearly for a test to see that that SIG can provide some reviewers. This was initially, these are the 29 endpoints that were backlogged by this tooling conversation, though I think we're slowly moving forward on that. All of this data that we're doing for our maps comes from the new conformance YAML, which has tests and when they were added, and it's driving the when people run the CNCF conformance, would be a Sonobuoy to submit it. This is how we compare which tests to run. The last thing I want to leave you with is we have this PR that is just for conversation, and it is our endpoint coverage. Yeah, well, I'm not sure if you can see the raw point on that, but this is what we plan to use, something like this possibly out of tree, where if new endpoints get promoted from, as they go from alpha, beta to GA, sending notes, we noticed you don't have tests for these yet. By the way, to get to GA, you'll need them until they get to the GA point and say, we're sorry, you're not allowed to promote these tests in the GA unless you do in the same manner that Liggett has done for these last few releases for his project. That's pretty much the update from me. If there's any questions, I'd love to get some feedback, particularly on our switching over to the new style of site with these graphs over here. That's me.
So stable endpoint means doesn't include beta, right?
It does not. So if we go back to this graph here, you're able to quickly choose over alpha, beta, and stable. And our definition of what should be conformant right now is stable endpoints that are non-optional. And so things like storage for now is not something that we have as a possibility for conformance.
Sounds good, thanks.
I will go ahead and if there's not any further feedback, to go ahead and switch over to the new site. I'm particularly interested in what people think of the technical debt graph and the creation of the KK gate, so that we don't have these things slipping through. We kind of, as the PRs progress, as we promote endpoints, having that a bot suggesting that they put those tests in place when there's modifications, and also at some point we're going to put that in as a PR blocking job or not.
It looks good. It looks very red, though. It feels like
No.
there's so much that we need to do there, and so few hands. So I guess it's a call for everybody to engage in the conformance working group and make sure that we add more coverage, so it can be better for everybody.
I want to point out that that help is, how do you see this green here? That's all Liggett and crew. And I think this was also some of, so we don't have the when it rises here, this solid green, this is our progress. This is solid progress, and it's going to go, you know, like if it stays at the same speed, I'm hoping to speed it up, right? But I'm happy with that. Yes, and some of the things that we do in our meetings is we have triage tickets, and in the triage tickets we note here's where we're going to focus on, here's the documentation, and I think we are going to add that SIG area so that we can get that commitment. So I wondered if there's a way when we engage with a SIG to have sponsorship for the test, and whether that's just something we do informally by trying to speak to the chairs of the SIGs to say, can I get a couple of hands to review PRs, you know, within a 2 to 4 day turnaround versus sometimes it's like 2 to 4 weeks. That's all for me then.
Thanks, Hippie. I don't think we have anything else on the agenda, so we wrap it up for today then?
Yes, we do. So the ARM64 support, I have my colleagues, can you stop? Sorry, my kids cut on. Oh yeah, I know call. Well, since the Vanam is on the call, I have 2 of my colleagues, Bing and Howard. Oh, they were, yeah, they're still on the call. It's 3 a.m. for them to join this meeting. So we had a discussion on the SIG release and a brief conversation, the SIG node. So they asked us to come to SIG architecture to talk about the support. And there's already the artifact there. It's just of a matter like how we reflect the support in which way. Howard, you have anything to add? Can people hear me? Or Bing, Robin?
So I think we can hear you. I think maybe there was some confusion when we tried to approach this topic earlier, and I thought we said, given that the Illumos team members weren't here, that maybe we mistakenly moved this forward to our next meeting. I think the tension that we're trying to resolve is that probably within SIG Arch we establish the standard that we follow for appropriate visibility that the various architectures and support matrix we have are being met for when we publish those artifacts. And so was there, I'm not familiar with this particular architecture, but as since I was out last week, if this was raised in SIG node, is there an existing standard that you're your team and engineers are meeting that you feel is sufficient, or are you looking or do you have a recommended standard you feel like you could reach, and that would be what you'd recommend the Kubernetes project hold itself to? That's probably what what we in SIG Arch would be looking to get feedback from your team.
Yeah, we have done the CI on the packet.net. So our question is that, is it sufficient to say ARM64 is supported, or do you expect that it should be, the CI should be done again, the same thing in the Google Cloud?
I'm sorry, my mute button wasn't working there. I think what we're trying to find is a bar we can hold all others to. And so if your existing capability could be enumerated as a basis that we could potentially evaluate others against, which I'm not sure we have enough in front of us right now on this topic to talk to. That's a starting point. And then the other following question is like, is there a clear contact point that is responsive to errors, such that if that signal is not passing, that the release is actually able to still release and not confuse the users who are pulling from the community. And so there's probably two topics we need to talk through, like, which is what is the level of support and what is the level of ongoing engagement and responsiveness to when that signal shows an error. And so
yeah. I got you. So the first question, the level of support is we are all in. We have a dedicated team to support the ARM64 support for this instruction set architecture. The second point, I can be the main contact. My colleague is Robin and Howard here, also on the call. We 3 people are responsible for any errors if it happens in the SIG node.
Okay. First, I apologize for your colleagues who are here at a very early hour. I think unless we appear to have a lighter attendance today than normal, probably due to the summer holiday that many are having.
4th of July here.
Yeah. And so maybe the best thing we can do is to do a more thorough dive on this topic in the next meeting, where you can come forward with what you feel is an appropriate bar. And it sounds like you've identified something that seems reasonable. And so we can then hold that up against maybe the folks from Illinois who wanted to have that discussion and say, are we holding everybody to the same standard? And again, I apologize that I don't think we're going to reach a satisfactory conclusion for you today, and your colleagues are up early, but maybe we'll get better attendance in our subsequent discussion, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. I see Tim, is it Tim Pepper? Has a hand up.
Different Tim. Sorry.
Okay.
There's so many Tims now. This is a really interesting topic to me, and I have every confidence that you guys are all in and that you are feel on the hook to support it. I'm still concerned about the broader community and procedures around, what do I do in SIG network if somebody reports an issue and I think it might be ARM related? Are we going to build SLAs around response time? Those sorts of questions, right? I don't want to get to a place where we say, well, you have to have people on call, otherwise we're going to kick you out of the supported tree, because that seems wrong. But I also don't want to be in a place where we're throwing it back and forth at each other saying, well, I can't reproduce it on Intel, so it must be an ARM problem. And you're saying, God, this can't possibly be an ARM problem. But bigger than that, like, is this a SIG Arch problem or is it a SIG release problem?
It was SIG release problem, but SIG release need a blessing from SIG Arch.
Okay, sorry, I missed that bit of history.
Yeah, so we went to the 3 meetings in a row, so discuss. So it flows from SIG release, then node, then Arch. So we are at the last stop here on Thursday. Yeah, for the users, we have the AWS Graviton 2 and the you probably heard of Fugaku, the ranking #1 for the supercomputer. So there were many users of Kubernetes on ARM64.
Right. As for myself, I've been helping out Binliu every time there is a question or a query around what to do, what are the next steps, that kind of thing. So I'm like, I do want to thank you all for the work you have already done. One thing that I wanted to check with you is, did SIG release give you guidance around what kind of tests that they would like to see in either the blocking or the informing dashboards before they can declare thumbs up on supported official support?
Yeah, so the SIG release has already seen the conformance test we have done. So they feel the support is there. It's just like a standard, whether it's a blocking or not blocking, right? Is it sufficient enough, or does it have to be do all the CI work again in Google Cloud?
So I think I echo Tim's question. I think there's probably like, what does SIG architecture's responsibility have in this space, which I assume is basically saying, is SIG architecture responsible for saying which architectures itself Kubernetes can, should, or desire to run on? And then that's probably a separate question from then figuring out the if a desire is deemed worthy, how are problems isolated and handled? And then there's the third question on if an architecture is deemed desirable and worthy, and we have a clear way of handling problems among groups, what is the signal that SIG release would define for saying that the release is good? And is that an accurate understanding of like the separation of concerns that SIG release is pointing to this SIG to help answer?
There is one more, Derek, which is conformance, right? So unless SIG Arch says alternative architectures can be conformant, the CNCF can't bless officially somebody's implementation of Kubernetes as conformant or not. So that is one more aspect to it.
Is there a conformance issue that's been raised that's tied to the architecture?
No, it's just that. What we have done already is we made sure that all conformance tests have the images with manifests. So ARM is definitely supported there. And then we made sure that the conformance image also is, the FAT manifest based. And we also made sure that, anybody running E2E test can run on ARM architectures. So we have done all the legwork as such already. So what is probably left is, in my view, SIG release having confidence that they'll be able to, fall back on somebody when things go wrong.
So then, Tim, it sounds like you've so thank you for all that summary. What I guess is missing in the project then is so you want to add support for a new architecture in Kubernetes document that kind of hits all those checkpoints you just discussed. And so that feels within the domain of SIG architecture to produce. Is there an existing set of documents maybe Tina and your team had been sourcing before to help navigate your way through these problems that we could better coalesce and then maybe make more prominent that we could talk through? And then I still think there's the general tension among the SIGs on problem identification that I probably needs a deeper discussion on. Like, does every SIG itself need to have a representative associated with that architecture to know that things are working or not, to reason through these things? Basically, is there a document we can look at that more crisply identifies the problem we could be talking through, and can we produce that as a next step? And is that something maybe Tina, you and your team would want to help put forward?
Sure. We do have this document. So Robin, can you give the link of the doc? We have a ticket. Are you awake? Hello, wake up. Howard, do you have the link? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not sure which documents you are looking for.
We were looking for a document that is in Kubernetes, one of the repositories, which lays out the roadmap on how to add a new architecture. I don't think one exists, but Tina mentioned that it might be. So far we've been working on a couple of issues, I believe, where we constantly talk about what is the next step, but I don't remember writing a document down which we can come to SIG Archit and say, please bless this document. I don't think we have done that part yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure about this document too.
Yeah, we have a ticket to ask whether we can write this document somewhere.
Oh, I would say, yes, please write a document. Nobody's going to stop you from writing a document. Yeah, we love documents.
Yeah.
Let's be clear though, like I want to be really fair. If we ask people to write a document, are we committing to actually reviewing it and putting enough thought into it to say, yeah, we think this is sufficient for arbitrary next platform?
Yes, I will sign up for it, Tim. Based on the experiments that we have done with ARM, I will sign up to say, sign up to review the document and give feedback on it, and then make sure that it's in a shape where we can all review it.
Yeah, thank you, Devin, and you.
Thanks.
Okay. If there's no other topics, I think we're over time, and so I want to thank those for staying later. And for those who are up way too early, maybe you can get some rest. But thanks for an exciting SIG architecture call today, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye, everyone.
Happy holidays
Thanks,
to some of you.
Thanks all.